So here I've got the Lone Peak 9 Plus from Altra. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about this shoe. Everybody knows it's the first Lone Peak with a Vibram outsole. And well, I actually have both versions, the 9 and the 9 Plus. This time I'm going to be focusing on the 9 Plus specifically, but I will release a comparison review in the future. So let's get right into the fit of the Lone Peak 9 Plus. So if you know and love the fit of the Lone Peak in the past, then this isn't going to be that dissimilar. It's still got that wider toe box, but something to note, I believe that there's actually a little bit more room around this big toe area. And it's something that we've heard elsewhere as well, that the toe box has just expanded that little bit. Another thing to mention is this midfoot. So actually in the 7 and the 8, I had quite a bit of pinching around this midfoot. And I think that's because of the overlays. So the overlays were pretty tough in those two versions. This has actually been softened out a little bit in the 9 and the 9 Plus, and it's allowed my foot to kind of expand into the midfoot a little more. Yes, I've actually adjusted the lacing just so I can actually get a bit more room in there. And if you really, really do have that wider foot, you can go for the Lone Peak wide. But this is to say that the midfoot isn't the widest on the market. It's forgiving, but I wouldn't call it wide. In the heel, pretty similar again, so it's quite deep and it's quite forgiving and wide. I'd say forgiving. Actually, it has got a bit of structure around the heel. This goes in line with some of the kind of stability features that we're seeing in the Lone Peak, and I'll get into in a little bit. But that's to say that the heel lock was okay for me. I've never found a Lone Peak heel to be perfect, so maybe if you found it good in the past, maybe it worked for you as well. And then lastly, the big thing to say is, yes, this is a deeper shoe. So at first, when I first tried this on, it was quite snug. The over the midfoot and even around the toe area, I thought it had actually become a lot shallower than the previous versions of Lone Peak. As I ran in it, I got maybe 20, 30K, maybe a little more. The shoe started to pack out a bit more and it felt a little bit more like a Lone Peak again, that deeper fitting trail shoe. So if you don't know what that means, basically if you've found a lot of tightness over the top of your foot here before, a superior is a really good example of this because a superior is very shallow. You will often find a lot of pressure over the top of the foot here. If that is you, then you go into like a Lone Peak and you'll find that you actually have room and it feels a lot more comfortable. That can also be true over the toes. So if you like a little bit of room to flex around with your toes, then you want a deeper toe box. And again, obviously the same applies to the heel. You will sit further down into the heel if it's a deeper heel, which the Lone Peak traditionally is. As I always find with pretty much most Ultras, I go for a lace lock in there, so I lock that down. And in the end, it gives an okay heel lock. I have never found a perfect heel lock with Ultra, but it works good enough. So let's talk a little about the feel of this Lone Peak 9 Plus. So again, quite similar to what we've seen in the past. I would say a small difference from the 8, at least anyway, is it's that little bit softer underfoot. You get a little bit more ground feel as well, and all in all, just a tiny bit more flexible. So I say it's trending back towards Lone Peaks of the past. The last two versions for me were stiffening up quite a bit. So it's nice to kind of have that feel and flexibility back in the shoe. I would also say that it's a really stable platform. So again, previous versions, I actually had a few issues of just rolling around in the shoe a little too much, falling out the side of the shoe, if that makes sense. And I think the stability is coming from these sidewalls and the heel. So you can see here that these midsole sidewalls are a little bit higher, and that just creates a little bit of stability in the shoe. So when your foot is planted, if you are off camber a little bit, that cupping of the midsole is basically stopping your foot from sliding over the side of the cushioning. So it's just that bit more stable. The heel does the same thing as well. So being a little bit stiffer, it's basically stopping that heel rolling over the side of the shoe. So the flexibility, I did talk about the flexibility. I think it has gained a little bit more. It's never going to be the most flexible shoe on the market. It's 25 millimeters in stack height. It's very hard to get flexibility in a shoe like that with durability. So just keep that in mind. But at the same time, yes, it has gained a little. This is one area where I think there's a very, very minor difference between the 9 and the 9 Plus. And I felt just a little bit more stiffness in the Vibram outsole 9 Plus. I wouldn't use that to actually decide whether to buy the 9 and the 9 Plus because it's so minor. I did notice when there was one on one foot and one on the other, you could just tell that slight difference. So let's talk about that outsole. This is another area which is kind of a little strange for me. So I did extensive testing between the 9 and the 9 Plus. So the Max Track outsole versus the Vibram outsole. This 9 Plus has the Vibram outsole. I was expecting to see big differences in terms of grip, especially in the wet. And I've got to be honest, it wasn't huge. In the dry, no real difference. I've got to say, I think the Max Track performed absolutely perfectly in the dry. Again, the Vibram, yes, of course it did too. So in that case, I don't feel it's worth the upgrade. In the wet, I would say there's smidgen of differences. I found a little bit more traction in this Vibram outsole. Again, I'm not sure it's really worth all the hype. I think where it's going to make the difference is the durability of it. So I'm still skeptical even on this point though, because I've had a look at the wear pattern on the Max Track outsole and the Vibram outsole, and I've been running in these pretty much 50k each, maybe a little more, and the wear pattern is actually really similar as well. So I don't know what to say. I personally don't feel there's a big difference between the two. For peace of mind, I likely would go for the 9 Plus purely because the name of Vibram is trusted and you may as well hedge your bets and get the trusted name. But if you really are penny pinching, go for the Max Track. It's not going to make that much difference in the end. That might be controversial. So considering I talked about the durability, let's look at the durability of the rest of the shoe. So this upper, it uses like this ripstop meshy kind of material here. And I think it looks very similar to what we saw on the Lone Peak 8. It did pretty well on there. It's quite good in terms of the resistance to any type of gashes or ripping. Ripstop makes sense. So it's a good choice. Breathability, maybe not so much, but this is a trail shoe. We want to optimize for a little bit more durability in general. The overlays, like I said, these are a little bit thinner than previous. Do end up scratching or scraping against the side of this shoe, you're not going to rip through the material. This toe cap here, well, it's actually really soft. I don't think it adds much protection at all. I think it's there for the actual structure of the toe box to bring the material away from the toes rather than adding the protection layer. But that said, this outsole here actually rolls up the front of the toe quite high, and if you end up kicking rocks, I do quite a bit, then you're protected on that front side quite nicely. The midsole, like I said, it has softened up a bit. It will likely pack out a little quicker because of that. This is just a normal EVA foam, and we pretty much know how Altra EVA foams go now. They flatten out fairly quickly, but it doesn't mean that you can't use them anymore. You can actually run them for a long distance. It's just not going to feel as squishy and soft as previous. So don't worry about that. Keep on running in them. Wait for something else to blow out. The Lone Peak is a good shoe for those who need a lot of room in their shoe. So when I say that, I mean usually depth and toe box here. I think that works really well on these longer distance, maybe drier conditions. I don't think it's really suited for technical terrain because of the upper being, well, it's comfortable, it's super comfortable, but it also means it can get a little sloppy when you're off camber, etc. So it's a really good long distance ultra shoe if the terrain isn't too technical. That also means it's a really good hiker and long distance hiker as well. That comfortable upper and comfortable fit in general, it means that you're not going to get as many foot issues and specifically toe issues because you're allowing your foot to breathe and it's as mobile as it should be. The 9 Plus in the US is $155. Is this worth it? Yeah, it's $15 more than the Lone Peak 9. It's probably worth the $15 more. Like I said before, it's the Vibram name that you're paying for. I'd still guess that it's probably worth it in terms of durability in the end. For that price and the legacy of the shoe and the fit that you know you're going to get from a Lone Peak, it's a decent option. If you're looking for something to go fast in, I'd say have a look at the Timps instead, or maybe the Mont Blanc line, but just remember the fit of those are a bit different. And if you're looking to drop down into something lower stack or get more ground feel, then the Superior can be a good option too. Again, have a look at some of my barefoot reviews as well, which is lower stack shoes, and there are some trail shoes in there. They're also interesting. But back to the Lone Peak, it's very much what we've come to expect from the Lone Peak family.